So we're back. Special extra edition, because there probably won't be one on Monday for technical reasons. No broadband. I'm like Scully next week. I don't have any broadband. Moving house. So this is the last particular studio. The curtains are missing, which will disappoint everyone. 4020 not live. Phil is here because we've got breaking news, although the time you've heard this, it won't be. And Newcastle Thunder will join the Betfred Championship in 2021. The RFL board have accepted a recommendation to promote Newcastle Thunder to play in the Betfred Championship in 2021. It says here on this exciting press release from the Rugby Football League. Air Commodore Dean Andrew, OBE, the former RFL president who chaired the panel, explained Newcastle Thunder was the unanimous choice for the panel for an outstanding application. The club's coaching setup and facilities are superb. Its community outreach is well established and growing. It is a very nice facility up there. I do like the idea that the RFL board could have just chosen somebody else despite the recommendation, a bit like the Electoral College in America. Not to take anything away from the other clubs who applied, Phil, but Newcastle ticks many boxes which obviously the RFL agree about.
Yeah, not least, an owner has a shed load of money, which isn't mentioned on the press release, but he does. I think the interesting thing is looking at the different processes. So the way it looks is Super League can decide who they don't want to play in it. There's a different selection process for who leaves the Championship and goes into Super League, but presumably that different panel has Super League representation who can make the case for still who they don't want in it. And yet it's a different panel who is a former president of the RFL who have a different view on, let's say, expansion. And all of this, it fits with the strategy and values of the RFL. Actually, it's the complete reverse of what we've just done with Toronto. So we're not comparing the two. They are completely different cases. They're playing in different divisions. They've gone through different routes. But it is, you have to smile sometimes at Rugby League that on the one hand, we're saying Newcastle is the right and unanimous choice because there's an element of moving the game forward. And I have to pay tribute to the community work that's done in the North East. That is definitely an area whereby I think having a team slightly higher up the rung of the ladder will help more kids get involved in the sport who perhaps are new to the sport, which is great. And that's not to say that, for example, Rochdale or Barrow aren't doing that. It's just that you've got a new market in Newcastle. I think the other thing that isn't mentioned is clearly we're opening the World Cup in Newcastle. Magic Weekend is going back to Newcastle. It's almost as if there are some dots on the map and people have joined them together. So whilst, absolutely any of the applicants will have had things about their bid that would have been enticing, I think it's the package with Newcastle at the moment. But I just feel that it's almost flashing a beacon that we turned off 3 weeks ago. So it is Rugby League, isn't it? But congratulations, they've got Eamon O'Carroll in there as their new coach. They've got clearly an owner and a link with the Rugby Union club whereby they're not going to be short of resources. They've already signed some players who I think we would all agree are of championship standard. So I think in terms of being competitive, they've got that aspect. And I think we've spoken a lot on this programme over the last 2 or 3 years about if you're going to take the sport to an area that was perhaps less ambitious than Toronto, then Newcastle was one of the ones that I think we all thought that there's something here that we should be capitalising upon. And we got it wrong with Gateshead, so let's get it right with Newcastle.
Lovely facility, obviously built for the Union side there, the Falcons. Went there a couple of years ago when the Bulls played there, when we were doing their games on Proper Sport, and it's a very nice facility. They're brilliant. The pies are nice, which is important for away fans.
Host match the Chicken Cottage.
There you go. It's a rugby ground. It's a rugby ground, and it's got a 4G pitch as well, which will please some, I am sure. But good news for Newcastle. Not so good news for those who missed out, but obviously they've got a chance to gain promotion on the field in 2021.
That's a really interesting point because it takes one of their rivals out. So, Doncaster and Rochdale and Barrow and Workington, they will all feel that their chances of getting promoted are now slightly enhanced. So they've lost the application process, but they haven't lost the ability to be promoted. And I think looking at the the way League One clubs have handled themselves this year and the unity around lots of the publicity that they put out. Obviously, we haven't yet seen the social media reaction, but I think it'd be generally positive, even from the clubs that aren't going up, that they'll get behind Newcastle.
Monday at midday, hopefully, I will have had a boiler commissioned, but I won't have Sky installed at that point, so I will have no idea until I get an email from Super League who that 12th club will be. Either Bradford, Featherstone, Lee, London, Toulouse, or York. We're not speculating on it because there's no point, but some clubs will be taking their drones back to the shop trying to get a refund after their great videos of the past few weeks. I will be glad when it's over, just because I understand why everyone's doing their fancy social media stuff, but it's all a bit fairly pointless, because I don't know Lord Jonathan Kane. I don't know if he's swayed by social media or has a mind of his own. We'll find out on Monday.
The difference is, I think this has been a friendly fight for League One into the Championship, and I think that whoever got the vote, there would be no losers overall. To coin a phrase, and I know we're not bound by the regulatory authorities in this particular medium, but I think whoever gets the vote, there's going to be an absolute social media shitstorm.
Yes.
And that's a shame, because on the back of a wonderful grand final, on the back of Kevin Sinfield's 7 in 7 and all the other people that have supported him, on the back of the profile the game has got, what we don't want is 3 or 4 days of absolute recrimination and people saying how dare you, and it's going to happen, sadly.
I'm just glad that some people who may take it badly have blocked me already on social media, so I won't see what they've put. It's a much easier world that way. But I think, as we said before, unless you are very much set up to finish 11th in 2021, it might be a whole waste of time anyway. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll talk more about Super League in a minute, because we need to talk about the other exciting news that happened over the last 24 hours. But before that, and coming up later, we've got Barrie McDermott, who's going to talk more about Kevin Sinfield and running and not running and cycling and running and various things. But first, here's an interview with Grant Millington, Castleford forward. I caught up with him earlier this morning to talk about their season, his future, and what his initial thoughts were on coming to Castleford all those years ago. Pleased to say Grant Millington joins us from the Castleford Tigers. Grant, hello, and I guess, as I've been asking everyone at the moment, how is 2020 treating you?
Very strangely, isn't it? It's definitely been a year to remember and a year to forget at the same time, but I try and look at the silver linings in all things, and got to spend a lot of time with my kids and my family. So it's been good to connect with them on a more frequently than I'd usually get to. So that's probably one of the only positives I can personally take from this year. But on that side, it's been good.
Yeah, I guess many people would say spending time with the family has been a bad thing, but I guess if you're a rugby player and you've got all your training and you have to concentrate on being in tip-top fitness, I guess having that time with your family is crucial.
Yeah, it is. It's when you're a rugby player, it's important to get your mind away from the game when you can, and freshen up mentally. And that 3-month lockdown period certainly gave us plenty of time to do that.
On the field for Castleford, started well before lockdown. You had that great win against St Helens. Not quite the same after lockdown. Do you think it was the period of time away from the pitch, or just, as it seemed to happen, everything just seemed to go wrong on and off the field after lockdown?
Yeah, I think it was just one thing after another. We went into lockdown so really confident that we could produce something this year, and coming out, we obviously had to keep training, and you've not got the same consistencies in your training. When you're training on your own, you might not be warming up the same. You might not be doing the same prehab, or you might not pick up on little niggles you've got. And we picked up a few injuries during lockdown, and then unfortunately for us, that just seemed to continue to roll through the whole season. And you can't just blame injuries. We had games there where we were just poor, and it just wasn't good enough for us. And we've got a squad that we believe that we can be competing for a trophy, but we just weren't anywhere near coming out of lockdown. So big pre-season for us, and build into next season.
Yeah, no luck whatsoever with injuries, especially at halfback, and you had to fill in there a couple of times. Obviously, every prop forward enjoys getting hands on the ball and controlling things. How did you find that this season?
Yeah, man, I enjoy it. I enjoy it a bit more when I'm thrown in there in the middle of a game and there's no real pressure on me, and I can just play what I see and do what I have to do. When you get told early in the week you're going to be thrown into the halves, the mind ticks over and you think of all the possibilities. And it's a little bit harder, but for me, I'm not expected to go out there and throw the big double cutout pass and find a winger and all that sort of fancy stuff. I just run the ball and play simple plays. I understand our structure really well, so it makes it a bit easy for me. But it's definitely something I do enjoy, just to do something different, as you said, and get the ball in your hands. And as I said, something different. It's enjoyable.
As you say, very, very talented squad at Cass, obviously hit by injuries this year. The thing you seem to be doing at the moment as well is re-signing a lot of those key players, not having too much of a turnover, and I guess that's important to keep that cohesiveness.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a new halves partnership this year, and we've not been on the pitch as much as we would like together, and that's given the time they've had together in training and in the games they've had, it's going to be a massive bonus. And we've got a pretty good spine, and with obviously Man of Steel, Paul McShane as well, and Evel's coming along as well. That'll take a little bit of time to gel, but everyone else around that to be able to keep that squad together it's really important to be able to progress your game. And we don't have to come in pre-season and start from square one. We can obviously touch on it, but we don't have to talk about all the detail in our attacking play and defensive structures that we'd usually have to. So it'll put us in a good start. You probably start us a few weeks ahead of where you usually would in a pre-season.
You mentioned Paul McShane there. What is it about Castleford that seems to produce these men of steel players every couple of seasons? That award seems to be going to a Cass player.
It's crazy, isn't it, for a club that people would say is a smaller club and not really one of the big names who we don't really sign marquee players or anything like that, but we tend to produce those players quite frequently, don't we? But I think it's just that we play an attractive brand of rugby, and even though at times we weren't at our best, but this season. But you look at people generally like to watch us play. But this year, Macca, even though we weren't playing that well, for him to get that award is outstanding. It just shows how much he controls our games, and even though we're losing games, he's picking up points every week, and he makes such a difference to our team, and you see that when he's not on the pitch for us.
Young Ollie Holmes has been busy in the last week doing his cycling. Did you ever fancy joining him on that escapade?
Definitely not. No, look, I wouldn't mind it. It's one of those things. He's got a bike. I'm not sure what it's worth, but it's like a spaceship, and if you've not got a decent piece of kit, it's pretty hard to keep up with him. I think Matty Crowther, our physio, did a couple of legs with him and he's on a bike that's 10, 15-year-old, and he said it makes such a difference. So, look, it's massive effort from Ollie, and obviously, and Kev Sinfield all putting money towards Rob Burrow and Motor Neurone. It's obviously Kev's been able to do that, the running, and Oggie's done something different. Obviously, he's still playing, so he can't put his body through as much stress as Kev can, but still a massive effort. I was talking to Ogg the other day, and he said I think he wanted to raise $2,000 or something like that, and I think he went over 15, and he was blown away by it himself, and really both those guys should be super proud of what they've done. Yeah,
it's great generosity from people as well, especially in these times where, as you say, 2020 has been a strange year for everyone. Obviously, you've had to play without the fans this year. How difficult was it to adjust to that?
Yeah, it was weird to start with. I think at training we do a lot of 13 on 13, which is obviously with no fans. So you're not obviously not going to hit the intensity that you do of a Super League game, but it's I think it gave us a little bit of a heads up of what it would feel like. But once you pass those first few games where you've not got the crowd back in you sort of get used to it. It's not the same. The crowds do have. It makes you realise how much of an influence they do have on games. But weird things like I think our first game back, were playing at Headingley, and I could hear the commentators talking when we were lining up for a restart. They were kicking off to us, I think, and you can hear the commentators talking, and you're like, you never really hear that, and it's just weird little things that you noticed. But I can tell you one thing, all the players are ready for fans to be back as soon as possible.
Yeah, fingers crossed with the vaccine and hopefully the way things are going. Obviously, we've seen fans in football and racing or whatever in the last few days. Hopefully, by the time we get to March, there'll be at least a few people in the crowd, and I think everyone's just desperate to see them back, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'm no expert, obviously, but you can have people in a restaurant in certain tiers and whatever, and that's important. But if you can get into a stadium, you can and be socially distanced, it's all open. Hopefully, for the players and the club's sakes, that we can start getting some fans back, and their sakes as well. There's going to be a lot of people out there who've been missing their rugby.
Obviously, it's been an annoyance more than anything to have these tests all the time. How have you found? I took a test last week. Thankfully, I was negative, but it's not the most pleasant of experiences, is it?
No, it's not ideal, is it? You know, it's funny. You sort of get a crowd standing around to watch people get their tests, because some people are different. I'm fine with the one up the nose, but I can't stand the one at the back of the throat. It makes me gag, and some of the boys are opposite. And Jake Truman's one of the funniest. He just tears come out of his face, and he gags and he sneezes and all sorts. All the boys will stand around and watch him just to come in and get his test done. But you know, unfortunately it's the way of the world at the moment. It's necessary to keep the game going. We got to do it. And look, it's not the end of the world. It's uncomfortable for 30 seconds, but obviously still not very pleasant.
Obviously disappointing not to be involved in the finals this year, but what did you make of that grand final and especially the ending?
Oh my God, I've never seen anything like that. Like, as a player, you know, in a grand final, you've played 80 minutes. Someone has a pop at a field goal from 40 metres out. You're sort of standing there with your hands on your head hoping it goes over. And for him to just follow that ball just in case, and just the luck, and obviously there's an element of luck, but his effort to do that as well is outstanding. And the game in general was unreal, wasn't it? And it's not often that you hear from people in Australia and the NRL that will compliment a Super League match, but you saw plenty of that, and it was well deserved.
You signed a new deal at Castleford. Was that an easy decision to make?
Yeah, look, obviously there's not as much money in the game as there is at the moment, and I was toying with the idea of having a look around, but you know, I sat on it for a couple of days and I thought there's no point. I wouldn't really want to go anywhere else. So we got the deal done, and I'm thankful for it. Gives us one more season here, and then we'll see where we go from there. But you know, it's done, and there's no really other place I'd want to be than Cass. So I'm thankful for that.
When you first signed a deal at Cass all those years ago, did you ever imagine staying this long?
God, no. We were coming over to experience something new, my wife and I, Amy, see the opposite side of the world, do a bit of travelling when we could, and we were going to do the 2 years and head home and start the next chapter of our lives. But you know, 10 seasons later and 3 kids, would never envision that.
What was your first impressions of Castleford and British Rugby League in general?
Mate, Cass, you know, I've lived in some areas back home that are kind of similar, you know, but when I first arrived, it was just cold. I remember the plane landing and there was ice on the window, and I thought, what have I done? And Stu Donlan picked me up and took me into Cass, and I've told this story a couple of times, but the club was meant to organise me accommodation for a month. I was in the air, and they called Ryan McGoldrick and said, listen, we've not got anywhere for him to stay. Do you know anywhere? So I ended up on the floor of one of Ryan's friend's house from the pub for a month during pre-season. And that obviously was a bit of an eye-opener, and I was thankful I came over on my own at the start. My wife stayed at home for a little bit until I got us settled in and found us somewhere to live. But you know, the club's come so far from where it was back then, and on and off the pitch. You know, guys come over. I remember when Jesse came over, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. They had a house ready waiting for him, had some food in the cupboard, so he was comfortable, ready for his kids. And I was was pretty jealous, but I was also thankful that the clubs progressed.
What is it about Castleford that keeps you there then? Is it the fans, the atmosphere, the team around you?
Yeah, I think everything. It's, you walk around Cass and people say g'day, and the club itself, and I think as well, on the pitch from where we were when I started, we've progressed so far, and I want to see it out until we win something. It's a massive goal for myself, for the club as well, but for myself, it's I think it would just top it off if we could win something, and I'm not one to really give up on the goals that I set, so that's been a massive factor. But the people in the club and the people in the town are fantastic, and it's really become home for us.
Now, we outside will always refer back to the grand final, but I guess as time goes on, that gets further and further away, and you just want to get back there and right those wrongs. Yeah,
definitely. Look, we've still got quite a few players here from that fantastic year of 2017, and we'd like to think we've learned a lot of lessons from that year and that game. And as you said, it's been quite a few years now, but we're still so hungry to get back there and really achieve that goal that we've set those years ago.
Well, where do you see yourself after Rugby League? Are you going to stay within the sport or go to something completely different?
Mate, I'd like to. At the moment, I'll probably head home and find some work. I'd definitely like to stay in the game, whether that be coaching or playing some I'd like to play some local league back there for a year or two, and then whether that goes into coaching either a senior side or even my son, Zach, he's just had his first rugby session last week. He's turns 4 in February, whether it's coaching some stuff with him and the juniors. I wouldn't mind, but I think it'd be silly for me not to try and stay in the game. I've learnt so much over the years, and be silly not to try and pass that on to some other people. And it's all I know. It's as what I've grown up with and what I've done as an adult. So whether it probably won't be in full-time capacity, but it's definitely something I want to stay involved with.
Obviously, then it's very early in your son's rugby league career. How are you finding it on the sidelines, watching him grow in the game? Obviously, at the age of 4, they just run around with a ball and try to chase it, don't they?
Yeah, that's it. He's still learning that he's got to put the ball down over the line. He's got a long way to go, but mate, it's fantastic. I still very vaguely remember my first year or two as a footy player, and it's just good fun. He had a great time running around in the mud, and as long as he's enjoying it, that's all that matters.
They love the mud. I don't think the parents love the mud afterwards, but they love the mud.
Yeah, no, that's right. He definitely loved the mud. I stripped him off out the front before I brought him in and put him straight up in the bath and the clothes straight in the washing machine. It was covered. So what little boy doesn't love running around diving in the mud with a footy? So he's it's definitely something that he's looking forward to every week.
As you say, it's all about enjoyment at that age. And I guess through your career, if you're not enjoying it, you wouldn't want to be out there, would you? No,
that's right. Look, there's definitely times where you're not enjoying it as much as you'd like to, but as a kid, that's all that matters, as long as you're enjoying playing with your friends and getting out there. But as a professional, there's times where you're not playing well yourself, or your team's in a bit of a rut, and it's really hard to get out of. But it's a bit of a cliche. Rugby league's that roller coaster, isn't it? And you just got to ride those tough times and come through the other end.
You mentioned it was cold when you first came over. Obviously, we play in the summer over here. What age did you stop wanting to play in the mud?
When I got here, when it was freezing. So yeah, at home it's a winter sport, but it's still warmer than here in summer. Sometimes it's very different conditions. But yeah, look, I've had some games in the mud that. I remember we played Warrington, I think it was over Easter a couple of years ago, and it was...
Massive puddles, yeah.
Yeah, or more like lake, wasn't it? That, even though I smashed my nose to bits that game, that was enjoyable because it was different. But I had one game, I can't remember what year it was, but it was very early on in the season. We played Leeds at home. Generally in a game you can warm up and you get once you've been playing for 10 minutes you don't really think about the cold too much, but everyone was going to scrums shaking and shivering, and it was one of those nights you were wet and cold through to the bone. Not ideal rugby league conditions.
That's the big rivalry in it, Leeds, and the fans in Castleford, obviously, and I'm from Wakefield, so I feel the same. Love getting one over on Leeds. How quickly did you learn about that rivalry when you joined the club?
Very quickly. I made my debut against Leeds, so it gets drummed into you pretty quick. Back then, obviously, we were a much weaker side than we are today, and they were very strong. But all the fans would say is, I don't care what you do all season, as long as you try hard and you beat Leeds and Wakefield. That's all that mattered to fans, and probably not so much anymore, but it's still pretty important to them.
Those fans will hopefully be back next year. As we close out this interview, Grant, thanks for your time as well. What would be the message to the fans for how you hope 2021 will go?
Well, first, the message would be thanks for sticking with us. It's been a tough season for us and you guys as well. Like a lot of Cass fans, it's their life. The Castleford Tigers, and we've not performed as well as we could last season. So we'll be working hard to have a big season next year and just get down to as many games as you can if we're allowed. And it honestly makes such a difference. And we've got confidence in ourselves, and hopefully we'll show that confidence to you guys and give you guys confidence in us that we're gonna perform next year and hopefully bring home a trophy.
Well, Grant, thank you very much for your time. Best of luck for 2021. Hopefully you have a nice recovery in the off-season and enjoy pre-season, and we'll see you on the pitch next year.
Will do. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks to the greats, one of our former guests back in the old days, Grant Millington, joining us from his palatial mansion in Castleford, and not from Ryan McGoldrick's friend's floor, which is the good news these days. Cass, one of those clubs who had an awful time in 2020. And I know people say, Darryl Powell moans all the time, but they could never get a settled halfback partnership. They obviously had the COVID issues, which hit every club, but them especially. And they'll be the ones who are wanting to certainly put a lot right next year. And as I mentioned to Grant on the interview, they're re-signing a lot of players as well, which means a lot of stability in that squad.
Yeah, and I think they're going out there and actually, there is going to be change this year at Castleford. I think, we all saw how unbelievably impressive they were in 2017. It's hard to keep that going. Everybody needs their contracts upgrading. Some people move on. You want to give the kids some chance. So I think that it's almost as if last year they were completely treading water, as a lot of clubs were. Injuries affected everybody, but I think we knew early on that Cass were going to be one of the worst teams affected. COVID as well in the camp. They had as many, if not more, than most stood down because of that. Never really got going. They got to the top of the league when we had what might be called the first bit of the season, the normal bit, and we never knew how good they could possibly have been. But I think Darryl was probably overly bullish in 2020 about. He kept saying, even when we came back, on our day, we're going to be difficult to beat. But they never really had their day after we came back. So I think, they've looked at their squad. They've looked at some areas where they think they can improve it. They've taken a couple of ruthless decisions with players who are coming to the end of their career. They're using that facility and money to bring in areas where they think they can shore that up. But I think that certainly the two signings from Huddersfield are going to be good for them in positions where they need them. We'll see. We will see.
Not been a great year, of course, of news all over the place, and some sad news this week, which has touched Cumbria, especially Jed Stokes passing away. And we thank him for bringing his son over to win the Cricket World Cup last year. But obviously, it's sad news, but well remembered up in Cumbria, which is a good thing.
Character. I mean, we're going to be speaking to one in a minute. There's absolutely no doubt that Jed could tell a story, liked to tell a story, engender passion in his place. A New Zealand international, so you weren't going to question his right to be telling people what they could do. He'd been there and done it himself. The story of how he lost his finger as well. The bravery he played on with until I'll just have it amputated. Yeah, of course you will. We'd all do that. Terry Matheson did that, didn't he, when he went to get a ball in France. Everybody who ever interviewed him, spoke to him, spent time in his company, has only good words to say about him. And I think The only downside is he couldn't persuade Ben to play rugby instead of cricket, because he might have been a decent rugby player.
He might have been, and then we could have had another Cumbrian saying we should have Super League up in the northwest, but never mind. Before we go and speak to Barrie McDermott, something 4020 magazine, which I understand is out now.
Yes, as we're talking, there are vans traversing the country, delivering it to subscribers and news agents. So hopefully that is your accompaniment to the mince pie when it arrives.
I'll be reading it while the boiler's being serviced. Obviously, a thing the magazine has been banging on about for ages has been NRL Europe. And now, according to the city editor at Sky News, or a city right, not the sports department, but the city department at Sky, this could be one step closer to happening.
Yeah, I don't think they did read last March's 4020, which outlined exactly what their investment would bring them. But I think what we can say is, whilst details are sketchy, it's very early stages. There's some fundamental questions to be asked, not least what would they be buying? Is it just a share in Super League, or is it actually the game of Rugby League in the Northern Hemisphere? Because clearly if people are saying, oh, there'll be ramifications for International Rugby League, well, that's actually run by somebody else. Are you invested in that? So there's all of the minutiae of what would they want and what return would entice them to come in. But I think what we can say for sure is that it's been talked about. And what coronavirus has done is it's made sports look at what their competitive advantage is and how do they best exploit it. And I think the NRL have got to the point where they need to do more than just play exceptionally well in 2.5 states in their own country. And what has triggered this is what has happened with Toronto. Because I think they thought, we'll leave it to Super League to get a foot in a new market. And when North America starts to be exploited, there'll be benefit for us. So whilst they don't want to run a team called Toronto, and they don't necessarily want to start a franchise in San Francisco because it's quite nearer to where they are, I think what they felt was, originally we were told there was going to be a test match, then there was going to be a World Cup, then there was going to be a team playing in a domestic competition. And as of where we sit at the moment, all of that's gone. But what it has proved is that there is a market out there. And I think the NRL have realised there's no way that we here have got the money to exploit that. And I think we spoke a lot about that when the decision was made for Toronto to be pushed out of the competition. It wasn't so much to do with their ownership group, and I think we all railed against some of it because we felt that there was a lack of ambition, and that Super League was saying we don't think we've got the resource to develop the market. Well, what it didn't say was there is a market, and I think the NRL have thought this is where we need to step in. It's really interesting as well, particularly if you are a conspiracy theorist, and I think we mentioned it last week on this programme, that the two domestic seasons are aligning next year, both kicking off on March the 11th. Again, that's not coincidence, I don't think. I think somebody in the NRL is saying, look, what would it look like if we could brand up everything as the same? What we don't know is, yes, there'll be the offer of money, and yes, some of the club owners will take that. What's the price? And is that price not just putting a few more quid in their pocket, but is that they have no say in the running of their sport? In which case, if a new investor comes in, 51% of the competition is owned from abroad, and say our policy is expansion because we want to sell to our corporate investors and our spectators in Australia names like London and names like Toronto and names like, I mean, they might be pleased that Newcastle are already on that step up. That's the say they're going to have. So for everybody who didn't want Toronto but wants the NRL, be very careful what you might be wishing for.
They'll put Fev in on Monday and then take them out when the NRL take over.
It's what you might lose to get the money. And I think the Rugby Union are finding that CVC are wanting to do some things that maybe the game itself doesn't want to do, but when CVC pay the bills, you do what they tell you.
do like the conspiracy that all of our best players will be asset stripped and go down under, as if that doesn't happen already.
No, it's the other way around. I think what you've got to look at is one of the other strands why it's important at the moment to the NRL is they are producing a lot of players, particularly from the Pacific Island area. And whilst they can have a team like the Fiji Silvertails in the New South Wales competition, if we're serious about going in there and doing some development work, where are all these players going to play? And where is it best that their under-20s play? And if that's in Super League, I think what you might find is a lot of their players start coming and playing over here. Now, again, we need to have a policy whereby we protect our junior players. But if you are going to start new teams and you need players to people them, we're back into Toronto and that model. So, we might have gone out of a frying pan and straight into a fire.
Maybe that trade deal I think we just signed one with Fiji. Maybe it's got no tariffs on rugby league players and they won't get stuck at Dover. So fingers crossed on that one. But we'll find out.
I'm massively behind the idea. Yeah, I think it's about branding as well. I think what we have learned from coronavirus is if you want to be a small sport, fine. But that's exactly, you are then pigeonholed that you will never get out of it. If you've got a brand as good as the two grand finals that we've seen, then perhaps the onus is on you as a business to sell it wide.
Maybe my opinions on things have changed in the last 6 months or so. We'll find out soon enough anyway, won't we? Let's get rid of us speaking for now. We'll be back at some point next week because we're going to speak to Barrie McDermott, who is a fine gentleman, Phil. You obviously know him very well. Glad to have him on the programme. He speaks a lot of sense for a lad from Oldham, doesn't he?
What I would say is it's astonishing the Barrie McDermott we're going to be speaking to compared to the Barrie McDermott who we first came across when he was wearing that shirt of Oldham those years ago, and he wanted to be a hothead. He wanted to, put literally in some respects put his stamp on the game. And he's gone through some real trials and tribulations. What people forget about him winning a Challenge Cup, well, he'll tell you, scoring the winning try in a Challenge Cup final, is that a year before that, coming back from a really badly broken leg, he was playing for Bramley on loan. So, he's seen all sides of the game, but what he's doing, I think, is the classic example of making the best. So, he's got a high-profile career in the media, which I think worked very, very hard to establish himself in. He clearly has been closely involved with not only the Leeds Rhinos Ex-Players Association, but how that can help Rob Burrow in his current situation, and certainly the Burrow 7 initiative, which I'm sure he'll want to tell us about. He's been the driving force behind that. Not sure he should have been wearing sunglasses on a snowy day in Oldham, trailing Kevin Sinfield. That looked a bit sinister. But the other thing is that, he has a job outside of rugby league. He works in finance. And I think if you were to turn around to Barrie when he was playing and say, the 40-year-old Barry's going to have three strands to his bow and they're all going to be very different and highly respected, then he's probably not the candidate you would have thought of. So he's great company. He tells a fabulous story, and we need more Barrie. So
we'll be back again at some point. Like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends, comment, subscribe to your YouTube channel because you need to get us up to 2,000. Thanks, Phil. Magazine is out here, because I can't remember how I introduced him. He's Barrie McDermott. Right, joining us now, one of the faces of Sky Sports Rugby League coverage. The only face that matters because he's on this podcast right now. Exactly. Our favourite half of Baz and Tez, because Tez hasn't come on yet. It's Barrie McDermott. Barrie, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm really well. I'm really, we talk about glass half full or half empty. My glass is overflowing this week because, we probably 12 months ago, a great friend of ours was sadly given some horrific news, and we all sat round a table, said what we'd like to do, said what would, be be the best thing for of course I'm talking about Rob Burrow, for Rob to have, you know, at the front of his mind, and you know, thanks to the man that is Kevin Sinfield, the country's talk about Rob, you know, I think the world, I think people all over certainly the Rugby League fraternity are talking about Kev and what he's done. And, you know, I've been asked 100 times, if not 1,000 times, you know, how's he done it? And I don't know any of my mates, you know, I'm talking about all of us that were sat round that table saying we want to raise this money, you know, give Rob a whole load of peace of mind. I don't know any of them that could have done it. So having been there for 2 or 3 of the days, just seeing what he's put himself through, I'm just so proud of him and so proud of what he's done for our pal.
I think he gave you a bit of stick, didn't he? You joined him on one of the days and gave you some stick.
Yeah, your singing got him through.
Well, I think he missed the W out on one of the descriptions he gave. Yeah, yeah. You know, the rule of 6 has played a major part. People who are listening to this, who are aware of the 7-in-7 marathon story, which I don't suppose anybody hasn't heard of it now, but just in case they do, just in case they don't, sorry, and they haven't heard of it, it's Kevin Sinfield, 7 marathons in 7 days, all under. Well, he went for 4 hours, and he was virtually under 350, if not for all of them. So it was a humongous challenge. But the rule of 6 meant that, you know, certainly people like Jamie Jones Buchanan, Jamie Peacock, myself, we had to interchange. We had to sort of fill a guest spot that changed the face, changed the voice, changed the banter that was keeping him going. So yeah, I was on day 4, where he said was by far his worst day, and those are you that kept tabs on it, and those that will go out and watch the brilliant documentary that Jones's media business has put together will see it was the snowy day. And yeah, it's what we have all the time up in Saddleworth. We're used to it, but running for 3.5, 3:40 odd, whatever it was, he said that was his toughest day, emotionally, physically, just a little bit drained. And yeah, it's an amazing thing, and I'm proud to be part of it as well.
Saddle sore at all?
Yes, bruises, bruises in places I didn't know would get bruises, and I'm a typical rugby lad, me, Phil. You know me quite well. I've got to the point where I'm you know, I'm due to ride, which was Thursday night, and thought, right, well, I'll have to start getting on the phone to my mates, see if I can lend a bike. Came home with one. Any of the people of a certain age that will remember that yellow Pages ad will remember the dad talking about the saddle being like a razor blade. Well, I had that conversation with myself when I had my first bike, and then I managed to borrow one of my daughter's boyfriend, which was a brilliant bike, $3,000 worth of mountain bike. But sadly, no, that didn't lessen the pain. My rear end is still glowing, but as the saying goes, it's all worth it.
I mean, the answer's probably within that programme you presented on Sky before the grand final, but what is it about Rob Burrow that makes him such a special character?
It's an interesting question, that, Rich, because you do think about it, you do mull it over, and as men, right, I'm not ashamed to be a man, I'm not ashamed to be a masculine, you know, old values, old-fashioned. I'm not afraid, but I don't like crying, I don't like getting teary. I don't feel like I have an outburst and a weep and I feel better. I'm not one of them. I don't like it. I'm like a lot of people I know, I fight against it. But when you do start to think about Rob and the impact on the game, first of all, you think about the impact on the game. And I'm not old enough, or perhaps wasn't taking enough notice of the era when Roger Millward was around. But it's reminiscent of Roger and his impact on the game. Small, diminutive, quick, smart, intelligent, and made bloody fools out of all the big fellas that wanted to get hold of him and give him a whack. But as a bloke, just a lovely, lovely man. And I have to be careful how I say this. There are people who've been in this game, and you know, they make enemies. I probably put myself in that camp. Make enemies. And if things happen, you know, you shrug your shoulders and say, he danced with the devil and all that stuff. I'm not talking about this specific illness. I'm just talking about life in general. But I don't know anybody that's got a bad word for Rob. So what makes him special, he's a lovely lad. He would do anything for anybody. That's the phrase that he keeps saying, and that's something all of us planted in his brain when we started talking about this game. Cast your mind back to, I think it would be January, would it? We all sat round a table, talked about getting the legends back out. I was loosely invited for what would have been a minute and a half cameo, but I just had one of my shoulders done and I couldn't do it. And I said, look, I can't play in this game, but what I can do is I can start the people that I know having conversations about, possibly filming it. I didn't for 1 minute think we'd get it on Sky. I didn't for 1 minute think that it would be another impactful viewing experience where everybody's just bought into, first of all, Rob and the plight of his family, and then this horrible disease of MND.
Your relationship, though, is slightly different, because for Rob to be the joker that he is, there has to be a victim. And I think the one thing we have learned from, obviously, the work that you do, the films that have been made, that was you a lot of the time. And yet you're still as close to him.
Yeah, I think he honed his skills on me. And then he perfected them when Kylie came. So, listen, I've never been afraid to have a giggle at myself. I don't take myself too seriously. I take the things I do very seriously. That's why I dedicate my life to our great passion of rugby league and sport, and in a lesser way to giving back. I know when you listen to Jonesy talks about paying it forward. I very much have that philosophy, but I have a different way of looking at it. I had so many black marks against my name, both as a player and as a drunken individual around the nightclubs of Oldham, that I have a lot of things to make up for. But in regards to Rob and his sense of humour, I always found him funny. So even when I was at the butt of them jokes, I just found it funny. So I think I've got a bit of a warped, twisted sense of humour, and we both shared that. But he has a way, Rob, of making you feel like you're the bully, even though you're the butt of the joke.
You're involved in the horse racing project, Burrow Seven. How excited have you been about that, and how many people have been involved with it so far?
Thousands have got involved. It's been terrific. Something I didn't know an awful lot about horse racing, but a business colleague of mine. So my working week is dedicated towards Sky. My whole life is revolved around rugby league, and then in the time that I'm not doing stuff like that, and I think this is born out of when I was a part-time player and working during the day. I've always done other things, and sometimes it was coaching, other times it was going in school, and a lot of the time it was working life. And a colleague of mine who's a Wigan rugby fan floated an idea about a racing club and sent some stuff through to me, and I sort of looked at it and said, I'm not into horse racing, so I don't see how it's going to work. At the end of last year, we started having some conversations about Rob. The beginning of this year, we started putting some things together, and then, of course, the world shut down. So then you start thinking, well, do you know what? We can't do dinners, we can't do rugby matches, we can't do all these things that would normally be our go-to fundraising projects. So I just started looking at it more and more and more. And Phil Hawthorne and his company, Racing for Business, have done it before. They showed me the stuff that they'd done, and I just started to buy into it a little bit more. But ultimately, it was forced upon us because we couldn't go anywhere. So more and more and more, I was sat in front of my computer thinking, right, well, let's have a little look now. And I met some people who talked about what it would mean for the horse to be a good horse, because you don't want to buy one off the beach on Blackpool, because sadly I might be one of them in a race. And then by the time we'd got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, we were into jump season. So we came across what is now Burrow Seven, with excellent pedigree, the hope is he will race at Cheltenham because his pedigree is that good. And then once everybody started to understand, and I have to say, I don't think a lot of people understood it. They just went, there's me 59 quid. I'm in. I love rugby league. I love horse racing. I love Rob Burrow. So I'm in. So a lot of it is retrospective explanations of what we're doing and what we're trying to do. But this racing club will be, hopefully, you know, they're a little bit like Jamie Peacock jumping horses. They can play till they're 12 years old. They have to be 4 to jump. So in theory, there's a lot of years where people will buy in again to the racing club, and it's a recurring revenue to Rob's Fight Back Fund. And again, just peeling back a few of the layers of what we're doing and how we're doing it, we very quickly got to a point where the target we'd set ourselves with Rob was reached, because he's a lovely lad and people have jumped on board with what we're trying to do. So then with the other money raised, you know, Rob's very, very adamant. He wants to help everybody. He wants to help more people. There was a lovely line on that documentary last night where Kevin said it perfectly. We've reached our target now and we can start to help some more people who couldn't normally get it.
In terms of how this has come about so quickly, we shouldn't be surprised that the rugby league community got behind it from the minute it became a cause. But in a year, it's almost taken on a life of its own. How do we best capitalise on this? Because I think you just hinted at it there, that yes, some of it's awareness, some of it's actual money for either research or looking after people. But I think one of the most heartening things was seeing the BBC, when they set Kevin off on his final marathon, having other MND sufferers and families sending their best wishes and saying how important it was. Obviously, the MNDA is linked to the Rhinos Foundation, so there's going to be more projects rolled out, I think, in the future. We can't let this trail really go cold, can we?
No, and it's an interesting question, isn't it? How do you... Because I heard somebody say, I read it in one of the papers, one of the articles that's been written about the marathons, this disease isn't incurable. They've just not done enough research. And what we've learned, and I'm stealing another line off Kevin here, is what we've learned over the last sort of 10 months is we can cure anything. If we put our minds to it, science, industry, everything that's all rallied together to find this vaccine for COVID-19, if we want to, we can find those cures. So I think we've just got to stick with it. I've had so many people that have come up to me and said, oh, will you please thank Kevin? You know, my brother, my uncle, my sister, you know, and it's not just exclusively young men. It's not just exclusively older people. It's anybody and everybody. There's a mate of mine that lives in Young in New South Wales, just outside Canberra, about an hour away from Canberra, and that little town in Young is riddled with MND, and they don't know why. And it's part genetic, circumstances that cause you to produce this protein that then damages all the things that go to fixing the ailments that we've got in our body. So we've just got to keep asking the questions. We've got to keep raising the money. We've got to keep talking about it, and we've got to do everything we can. And that philosophy of getting out there, and we've seen on Monday now. Then I'm all lost with my days. On Monday, when we finished, of course, Kevin's doing what he's doing. He must have done 1,000 interviews, and I was stood at the back, just watching, thinking how special it was for him to get that praise and that accolade, and rightly be able to then stand up, as he does better than anybody else in our game, and articulate it really well and talk about Rob MND in words that just bring everybody in. And there was a lady that come to me and she said, I think it's fantastic what you've done. I think it's amazing. I think, you know, it's made me think about what I can do, and it's made me think about what I can give. And maybe the day after, she's gone on social media and said, I've been inspired by 7 in 7. I'm going to do my own set of challenges over the next week. And then very shortly after that, I'm not sure whether it was Leeds or the RFL that released a little link to say, if you want to do something, if you decide that you want to do 7 in 7, this is where you can donate your money, and we'll support you all we can.
It's the amazing generosity of people. We're obviously living in, as you say, these weird times where a lot of people have been out of work, a lot of people have been laid off, but still, to raise £2.5 million in a week is just shows the ridiculous generosity of people who have been touched by Rob's story.
Yeah. So my week was Friday, where we got over 77. So then, not being able to run at weekend, my phone hasn't been out of my hand. So I've been emailing people, texting people. I'm on a load of ex-players WhatsApp groups. Get some content out there. Talk about Rob. Talk about Kev. Let's see if we can get to 777. Which again, I was with him when that ticked over 777. It was more or less when we set off on that last day. I was with him when it went over 1 million. Having spoke to him over the last couple of days or so, it just keeps going and going and going. And it is because of Kev, it is because of Rob, and it is because of MND. And those three things are making people chuck that tenner in, chuck that 20 quid in, whatever it is. And it's great, and it's something to celebrate. It's also very sad. It's also, I wish we wasn't doing it. I wish we wasn't having to get together. And those of us that get involved in the charity things are doing it because we want to do something good, not because, one of our pals is sadly in need of our support.
So what is it about the air in Oldham? Because this was fashioned in Oldham. It was Oldham people that carried it along. There is something about you guys that is just a little bit special.
We live on a mountain, Phil. We live on a mountain, and it's always raining. It wasn't all supposed to be in Oldham. There were different venues, and it was like a bit of a roadshow plan because, again, of COVID. And Andy Burnham was quite good. The people over the other side, over in Leeds, were quite good. But everywhere else, it was all just a little bit too complicated with no automatic connection. And not for 1 minute saying they didn't care, but Kev's from Oldham, and Rob and Kev are both synonymous with Leeds. So those two places fit. But to answer the question, I don't know, Phil. We're like a lot of northern working class towns, and especially when you look at places, I'm going to pick somewhere random like Barrow. Barrow had two players in the grand final, didn't they? They had Brad Singleton on Wigan, and they had Morgan Knowles playing for St Helens. These towns that aren't and don't have a Super League presence are still managing to churn out, produce talent. They still manage to cultivate the right minerals. It's part nature and it's part nurture, like everything in life. You're born big. You like your food. You're a little bit twisted, so we'll steer you in the direction of rugby. And then if we get a couple of good role models around you, a couple of mentors, maybe you can carve a career out in this great sport of ours. But we're always proud to be from Oldham, and I haven't done it for a while, but for a long time, when a young pro used to sign for an Oldham club, I used to actively find them, seek them out, sit down with them and say, don't undervalue yourself. Don't think that when you go to Wigan or Saints or Leeds or Warrington, wherever it is, don't think that you're sitting round a table, people are looking down on you, because we're built differently. It's harsh, it's cold, it's wet. Typically we play for teams that have got 5 good rugby players and everybody else is probably just too fat for football. And they'll have a go, but, they just enjoy the beginning bit and the after bit a lot more than they're getting muddy and bloody. So we don't necessarily focus on the scoreboard. That doesn't mean we don't like winning. We're not beaten until we give up. So that kind of philosophy, I think, runs through the town. You got Mark Sneed, to name but just one who comes to mind, who turns up in a big game and just shines like a bright beacon. So we have. If I thought about it, I could name 2 or 3 in every first team squad, and then 2 or 3 again in the academy setup that want a go at a professional rugby league.
We need to talk about that grand final in a bit, but just a story from Rugby Union this week, which is concerning Steve Thompson, World Cup winner with England, quoted this week. He can't remember playing any of those games. It's frightening, from the 2003 World Cup. There's obviously an issue with head injuries. It's been talked about a lot. We talk about player welfare. There's court cases in America, now this court case in Rugby Union. Is it something that concerns you in your future and the future of those you played around?
Well, Phil and I had a very heated debate, didn't we, maybe a week ago. Steve Thompson, who I got to spend a bit of time with when he came to Carnegie, a big man, big boisterous man. It's sad. It's sad what happens to some people. It is sad that there are people, and I'm thinking about Leeds Rhinos and somebody that's involved in their squad now that's struggling to get rid of the headaches, the migraines, the legacy of too many bangs on the head. It will happen. It is going to happen. There's two ways of looking at it. The first way is you've got to be prepared. As a game, the club and the game as a governing body need to prepare for that first one that says, I'm not well, and it's because I played that game, and it's because this doctor, that physio, that coach made decisions on my future that have cost me my, I'm thinking of Alex Popplewell as well, the Welsh Rugby Union lad. He's got early onset Alzheimer's, is it? Or dementia, one of them. And these things will happen. But as Phil and I spoke about, if you get blokes in a room on their own and say, there's your contract, you sign that, but there's also a little caveat at the bottom that says, if there is complications from that, you accept your own responsibility. I think 99.9% of the people that have played the game would do that. And I'm all for player welfare. I'm all for the aftercare and the protection of players and their future. But I don't think you can do that in the game that we play. And it's very sad and it's unfortunate. But if we keep making things safe and as safe can be, then very soon we'll be playing touch and pass.
I think one of the really interesting things I came away from our debate was that you're actually in a unique position to talk about how the game's changed, and then clearly the impact that may have had on the medical side of things, because you started off part-time and in the winter and moved into the professional era going full-time, and then obviously the training that you did changed. The collisions in training, I would imagine, in the rest of them were on a par with some of the ones you would have had in a game in your early days.
Yeah.
Is that where the sport has to come in and look at rules and head injury protocols? Because it's not so much just that it's your responsibility for yourself, and I don't think anybody would ever argue that. Is it that because the sport itself has changed, the sport also needs to look at itself and make sure that you're safe playing it?
I've often described rugby league, so people will say, right, how do you get yourself in that mental place, but also that physical place where you're running into a collision that's the equivalent of the car crash? And I've often described it as the bloke that's on TV on the Guinness Book of World Records show, and he chops a big block of ice or a big block of concrete or something equally as tough and as difficult to do. He hasn't just walked in off the street. He's had to prepare his body and get it into a certain state. Your hardened bones, obviously your muscles and everything else, you get them into a place through repetition. Coaches will talk about repetition. I haven't had enough reps with my players on the field, and I've heard it a lot during this time where they've hardly had any time to play. They've played, they're recovering, and then they're getting ready to play again. So coaches will say, I haven't had enough reps with my players, but that goes for not just getting ready to play certain teams under certain conditions. It goes for your body as well. I'm pleased that we've waited until March. I would like to have seen it into April before we start this next year. Not for COVID, for operations, for recovery, for rehab. And then once you've got rid of the damage that you've done this year, to then get your body into that right physical state for next year. There's an article that's been written this week on rugby union, and maybe the governing body having a control over how much contact work is done, what level of contact work is done, to maybe pull back and as a game, as a union, whatever it is that makes the decision, people say, no, you're not doing that. We're not allowing you to do that. My fear is that the consequence of that will be that when it comes time to run into that collision, that you've not hardened the bones, you've not prepared yourself physically and mentally to take that impact. Now, when we were discussing this last week, I said something to you that, you know, during my career, I've had 26 operations. 26 times I've gone on the operating table to repair something. It would be start your season, finish your season, play internationals, get your operations, start your season. That's how the cycle went for however many years. Recently, I had a new shoulder, the same replacement joint that some players have at hips, knees. I had to have a shoulder one. But I can remember going all the way back to, I think it was 1999, when I started to have pain-killing injections in my shoulder. The doctor saying, you know, this isn't a fix it, this is a putting it off until you can fix it. But I, Phil, needed to pay my mortgage. I needed to make sure that I could get selected for the team. And if I didn't get selected for the team, then I couldn't pay my mortgage, then I wouldn't get a contract, and then I'd be out of a job. So how you then get that balance of, you're not allowed to make those decisions, but by the way, when you don't get a new contract because you've only played 11 games this year, I just don't know how you do that, because it is a ruthless sport with only a very limited amount of money, that they can't be emotional about these things with players. There's a player, well, I'll say it, there's Ben Flower at Wigan there. Ben Flower's done 9 years. He's given great service to Wigan. They haven't got a reason to give him that 10th year, which would allow him, and I'm putting myself in his position now, would allow him to have a testimonial, to give himself a good chunk of money to set on the next part of his journey, because part of the reason players play too long, it might well have something to do with the changing room. It might have something to do with the adrenaline and the roar of the crowd and all that nonsense. But most of it is, as working class lads, as lads who are not particularly academic, let's put it that way, that's a calm way of putting it, we're kinesthetic. We haven't got anything else. So when we finish as a rugby league player, a lot of lads are saying, well, I'll get I get a qualification as a plumber or as a bricklayer, or I'll deliver goods, or I'll do that, because as a game, sometimes we don't work on them to make them understand what a skill set they've got, what they can offer a working environment. You know, the things that make them exceptional rugby players in the working environment, in whatever industry they go in, they would, as soon as they know what they're doing, they would excel in that environment.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on. I know that these are subjects that we could talk all afternoon about, but one is transition, because the Barrie McDermott who started out playing rugby league at the watershed inns and then terrorised the Aussies is not the Barrie McDermott you would think would now be a consummate television presenter who's involved in the world of finance, who has pulled together a racehorse syndicate. Can you look back and say, you know, transition is something that we need to do more of? But you're a fantastic example of how rugby players can do it outside of the game.
I had some wonderful mentors. I had some people that spent time with me. I could give you a list of them now, but right from the age of 18, people who sat down with me and said, you need to do more of that and less of that as a rugby player, were probably the same people that started to say, invest your time and invest your energy into things that will excel your post-career. So 18-year-old Barrie McDermott, I wanted a big house, I wanted a nice car, and I didn't want to work. Well, that's not a reality, is it? You're not going to get those things unless you put the hard work in. I do get disappointed when I still hear some of the players that are playing now say that they start work at 7. I'm doing that thing with my fingers. They start work at 7. They finish for 1, and then they're getting ready as a full-time rugby player. They're getting ready to do the next day's training. They're focusing on the diet and the nutrition, and it's a contradiction, because people who bring you into the clubs will bring you into their environment and say, we want you to be so dedicated, so tunnel vision, single-minded, that's all you think about. But I was given advice of some brilliant mentors that said you can do that, but you can also look at what the next step is going to be for you as an individual and think, you've got 2 or 3 hours to play with that. I worked on the building sites before I went to Wigan, which was my first full-time experience as an Oldham player and as a young adult before I was a professional player. I was a builder. I was on the building sites of the Northwest, going up and down the M56, M62, trying to earn a couple of quid. But I also got a strong work ethic from both those days and the people around me that I grew up with. My mum and dad have been the best role models and the best mentors that I could have ever had, because it's get out, get to work, bring home some money, and maybe just touching on the last topic we discussed, which was the injuries and all that. My attitude to injuries was probably the same thing that made me successful in the working environment. Is I might have a cold and I might not feel it, I might not be tired, but I've got to get out there because I've got a family to provide for and I've got a future to secure. So if we are serious about player welfare, and it means different things to different people. So player welfare, one of the aspects of player welfare is how you invest your money. You only need a certain amount of money, so what you do in the rest of it. Part of it is personal development. How are you improving yourself to make sure that transition that will happen, there's not a might about it. It's going to happen. You just need to be as ready as you can be. So when that decision needs to be made, you're in a good place to make it. We talked about Kevin Sinfield right at the beginning. I only know Kev. He's the only man that I know that has a piece of paper in terms of a qualification. I think he got an honours in the end, didn't he? Is he? You'll tell me what he got.
Sports Business Administration. He got an MA.
MA, that's it. I knew it was in sports business. But he's got that piece of paper. But alongside his playing career, he was doing both. He's the only bloke I know that when he was dislocating fingers, having knee injuries, shoulder injuries, whatever it is, didn't say, do you know what? I've had enough of breaking my body. I'm going to do that because that's a lot easier than this. So if players have the right plan for the transition, and player welfare managers is a really good step forward. I did a little bit of that in my time at the Rhinos. That's a great step forward, but it's not enough. We need to get some backing. We need to get some finances. Most of all, we need to pierce the conscience of the player to say, you've done 4 hours, you've got another 4 hours that you can use and utilise to set yourself up for the future.
I should probably spend my time better. Go on, Phil. You can, because we're running out of time, and I've got only frivolous questions.
One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I know it was very important to you, and I'm not sure we've ever capitalised on it. Playing for Ireland meant everything to you. And when you look at that quarter-final in the World Cup in 2000, arguably the best game of that entire tournament, why is it that, so far on, almost, 20-odd years later, Ireland isn't a powerhouse in rugby league?
I genuinely think if we put some effort and we send some people out to watch, I'm talking about domestic Irish rugby union players here. I'm talking about domestic Welsh rugby union players and Scotland in that case as well. You think back to when I was watching the game and I was lucky enough to play with Jonathan Davis, but we had such powerful names that have converted from Welsh rugby union, probably because the Welsh rugby union lads are working class and they've come from that environment. We connected with them on the right level. The English rugby union players, not so much there, that private school. Ireland, there's probably a little bit of both. But if we went away and we looked at players who are 21, 22 years of age, I'm not being generic here, but if you take 6 foot, 15 and a half, 16 stone with decent ball handling skills, we could make them and convert them into a Brian Carney. Brian Carney was as raw as they come. Brian will argue that he wasn't much better at the end of his career than he was at the start, but he was a real success story of what we can do with a player that suits our game. So I loved playing for Ireland. My family would always be proud, but the biggest story for me was always about spreading the game. I love the game. I owe the game everything. I owe the game everything because it's taught me everything, good, bad, everything in between. If you behave like an idiot, you'll get flicked. if you do the right things more often than not, on the pitch, off the pitch, training, and in general as a human being, you'll get what you deserve as well. What we aren't doing is we aren't looking outside our own little parameters. We've got blinkers on. You know, we've got clubs, other clubs in the Northwest that aren't as strong in the amateur game. Instead of strengthening their amateur game and then likewise going and looking into Cheshire and around that rugby union hotbed, they're going looking at Wigan's best or Wigan's surplus best players, if that makes sense. So Wigan have got 30 players every year that turn 16 at the same time that are capable of playing at a professional level. Some teams would rather go and get the 11th or 12th or 13th best player in Wigan than do a little bit of work in their locality and then spread the wing and just think outside the box a little bit. I'll give Fitzy his credit at Warrington. Done a lot of work on youth development during his time and a little bit before him, but they're looking at those union converts. I mean, Luther Burrell didn't work out. If you'd have got Luther Burrell at 23, 24, might well have worked out. And he's always looking about how he can improve what he's doing in recruitment and in retention.
Bang out of time, as ever. The minute is counting down on the screen. Sum up the grand final in 10 seconds, Barry. Absolutely
Unbelievable and a privilege to be there. I couldn't speak highly enough about the grand final, the players within it, the stories, the narratives, everything is there. I don't understand and I don't know why we're not still talking about it all day, every day. Probably because we're talking about marathon runners.
Yeah, we had too much to talk about. That's the problem. That's it. You know, if we had more time, we'd talk more about the grand final. Barry, it's been a pleasure. We'll get you on again if you're willing to do so.
Of course.
But thank you very much for your time. I'll stick all the links out about everything, and we'll hopefully see you in person in 2021 at some point.
Thank you, gents. I'll see you soon. I'll definitely be on again.